The sound echoed louder than it should have. A sharp crack in a federal courthouse lobby, Officer Daniel Reeves's hand striking Naomi Brooks across the face as her visitor badge slipped from her fingers and spun across the cold marble floor. No one stepped in. Dozens of people stood just feet away. Lawyers, clerks, security, watching, phones half raised, eyes quickly turning away. No one spoke. No one moved. The silence felt heavier than the slap itself. And Naomi? She didn't yell. She didn't argue. She didn't even touch her cheek right away. She just bent down slowly, picked up her badge, and glanced at her watch. 11:59. Then she looked straight at his nameplate. "I won't forget," she said quietly. That was it. No anger. No scene. Just certainty. Reeves smirked, already turning away like it was nothing, like she was nothing. But what he didn't know was that in less than 60 seconds, those courthouse doors were about to open, and the same room that stayed silent for her wouldn't stay silent for him. The courthouse lobby smelled faintly of polish and winter coats damp from melted snow. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pale glow across the marble floor, where footsteps echoed in steady, practiced rhythms. People moved with purpose, lawyers clutching leather folders, clerks balancing stacks of files, visitors glancing up at signs as if trying to decode a language they didn't quite understand. Naomi Brooks stepped through the revolving doors without rushing. She paused just long enough to adjust the strap of her worn handbag and take in the room, her eyes moving calmly across the security checkpoint ahead. Her coat was simple, charcoal gray, pressed but old. Her shoes had been polished that morning. There was nothing about her that demanded attention, and yet there was something about the way she stood, straight-backed and composed, that quietly held its own ground. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the glass doors behind her. Inside, the line at security shifted forward. Naomi joined the end of it, her gloved hands resting lightly over a small folder tucked against her chest. She glanced at her wristwatch. The face was scratched, the leather band softened with age, but it kept perfect time. She adjusted it slightly, then looked ahead again. Next. The voice cut through the low murmur of the room. Officer Daniel Reeves stood at the metal detector, one hand resting on his belt, the other gesturing impatiently toward the next person. His uniform was crisp, his posture rigid. He had the kind of presence that filled space whether it was needed or not. Naomi stepped forward when it was her turn. She placed her handbag on the conveyor belt and reached into her folder. "Morning," she said, her voice even, almost gentle. Reeves didn't return the greeting. His eyes swept over her quickly, pausing just long enough to form an opinion. "Hold up," he said, lifting a hand before she could present anything. "Where do you think you're going?" Naomi blinked once, not confused, just measuring the tone. "I have business here," she replied, pulling out a visitor badge. Reeves let out a short, humorless laugh. "Wrong building, sweetheart. Food Stamps office is down the street." A few heads turned. The line behind Naomi shifted, people pretending not to listen while listening all the same. Naomi held the badge a little higher. "I'm here for a court proceeding." Reeves didn't look at it. Instead, he stepped closer, his voice dropping just enough to carry. "Sure you are," he said. "People like you don't belong in real courtrooms." The words hung there, heavier than they should have been. Naomi's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the badge, but her expression didn't change. "People like me?" she asked quietly. "Don't play dumb." Reeves tilted his head, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "This isn't some daytime drama. You don't just walk in here and pretend." There was a moment, a thin, fragile moment, where something could have shifted. Someone could have spoken. Someone could have stepped in. No one did. Naomi inhaled slowly, steadying her breath. "Officer," she said, "if you'll just look at my pass." The sound came before the thought could finish. Sharp, sudden, final. Reeves's hand struck her across the face with a force that snapped her head slightly to the side. It wasn't a drawn-out act. It was quick, almost casual, as if he had already decided it didn't matter. The lobby fell silent. The visitor badge slipped from Naomi's fingers, hitting the marble floor with a soft, hollow click. It spun once, twice, then settled near her shoe. No one moved. Naomi stood there, her cheek tingling, the warmth spreading beneath her skin. She didn't raise a hand to it right away. She didn't shout. She didn't step back. She simply stood. For a second, 2 seconds, long enough for the silence to grow uncomfortable. Then she bent down, slowly, carefully. She picked up the badge, brushing a small speck of dust from its surface with her thumb. Her movements were deliberate, almost meticulous, as if she were restoring something that had been interrupted rather than broken. Around her, phones began to rise, quietly, hesitantly, screens glowing as people captured what they hadn't stopped. Naomi straightened again. This time she lifted her gaze, not to the crowd, not to the cameras, but directly to Reeves. Her eyes didn't flash with anger. They didn't plead. They observed. She let her gaze drop, just briefly, to the metal nameplate pinned to his chest, Reeves. She read it once, then again, committing it. "I won't forget," she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried. Reeves scoffed, already turning away, as if the moment had ended the second he decided it had. Behind Naomi, someone shifted their weight. A man cleared his throat, then looked down at his shoes. A woman near the wall lowered her phone, her expression tight with something she didn't act on. Naomi adjusted her coat. She glanced once more at her watch. 11:52. Then she stepped forward again, as if nothing had happened at all. And somehow, that was the part that made the room feel even quieter. Because the question wasn't just why she didn't fight back. It was why she looked like she didn't need to. The silence didn't end all at once. It thinned slowly, like fog lifting off a cold lake, revealing the shapes of people who had been standing there the whole time, watching, waiting, choosing. Naomi Brooks stepped forward, as if the moment behind her had already been filed away, handled, placed somewhere it would not control what came next. The line ahead had stalled, but she didn't hesitate. She placed her handbag back onto the conveyor belt with the same careful motion she'd used before, smoothing the strap as if nothing had interrupted her. The officer at the X-ray machine, a younger man with tired eyes and a badge that still looked too new, glanced between Naomi and Reeves. His hands hovered over the controls, uncertain. "You gonna process her or what?" Reeves said, not looking at Naomi anymore. His tone dismissive, already bored with the scene he had created. The younger officer swallowed. "Ma'am, could you just—" He gestured weakly toward the metal detector. Naomi nodded once. "Of course." Her voice was steady, not forced, not brittle, just steady. She stepped through the metal detector. The machine stayed silent. No beep, no alarm, nothing to justify what had already happened. Behind her, someone shifted. A man in a navy suit lowered his phone halfway, as if unsure whether he should keep recording now that nothing was happening. A woman with a briefcase clutched to her chest looked at Naomi, then quickly away, her mouth tightening. Naomi reached for her belongings on the other side. She took her time, sliding her folder back into her handbag, aligning the edges so nothing bent. Her fingers lingered for a second longer than necessary, pressing the folder flat, as though it mattered more than it should. Reeves watched her out of the corner of his eye. There was something about the way she moved that didn't match what he expected. No shaking hands, no raised voice, no hurried exit. People usually left fast after something like that. They muttered, or they glared, or they tried to salvage their pride in whatever way they could. She did none of those things. She just continued. "Hey!" Reeves called out suddenly, louder this time, reclaiming the room. "I'm not done with you!" Naomi stopped. She didn't turn right away. She simply paused, one hand resting lightly on the strap of her bag, as if deciding whether the voice behind her required her attention at all. Then she turned. "Yes, officer?" she said. Reeves took a step toward her, his boots striking the marble with sharp, deliberate sounds. "You don't just walk through like nothing happened," he said. "I said I needed to verify your credentials." Naomi held his gaze. "You had the opportunity to look at them," she replied. "You chose not to." A ripple moved through the small crowd. Not loud, just enough to be felt. Reeves's jaw tightened. "Don't get smart with me." "I'm not," Naomi said, her tone unchanged. "I'm being clear." That word, clear, hung between them. For a moment, Reeves looked like he might laugh it off. Instead, his expression hardened, as if something about her calm had unsettled him in a way he didn't like. "Papers," he said, extending his hand. Naomi opened her bag and pulled out the visitor badge again, along with a neatly folded set of documents. She handed them to him without hesitation. This time he took them, but he didn't read them. He flipped through the pages quickly, more for show than for understanding, his eyes barely scanning the text. He paused on one page, frowned, then shook his head as if confirming something only he could see. "These look off," he said. "They're issued by this courthouse," Naomi replied. "Yeah?" Reeves tilted the page. "Because from where I'm standing, they look like something printed off a home computer." The younger officer at the X-ray machine shifted again, glancing at the documents, then back at Naomi. "Sir, those look— I didn't ask you," Reeves snapped, not breaking his focus. The younger officer fell silent immediately. Naomi watched the exchange without comment. Her eyes moved briefly to the younger man, just long enough to acknowledge him. Not to ask for help, not to plead, but to recognize that he had seen something. Then she looked back at Reeves. "You're holding up the line," she said quietly. That did it. Reeves let out a sharp breath, stepping closer again, invading her space just enough to make it clear that this wasn't about procedure anymore. "You don't tell me how to do my job," he said. "I'm not," Naomi replied. "I'm reminding you that other people are waiting." Behind them, the line had grown longer. A man checked his watch, then looked toward the exit as if considering leaving altogether. A woman whispered something to her companion, both of them glancing at Naomi before looking down again. No one stepped forward. No one said, "Stop." Reeves held Naomi's documents in one hand, tapping them against his palm. "You know what your problem is?" he said. Naomi didn't answer. "You walk in here like you belong," he continued. "Like you've got somewhere important to be." Naomi met his gaze. "I do." Another pause. Longer this time. Something flickered in Reeves's expression. Annoyance, yes, but also something else. Something closer to doubt, quickly buried. He shoved the documents back toward her. "We'll see about that." Naomi took them back without looking down. She slipped them into her folder, smoothing the edges again, restoring order. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Naomi spoke. "You should have checked first," she said. The words were the same as before, but this time they landed differently. Reeves frowned. "Checked what?" Naomi didn't answer. Instead, she glanced at her watch. 11:54. Just a small movement. Easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. But someone was. Near the far wall, an older man in a maintenance uniform leaned against a cart of cleaning supplies. He had been watching since the slap, his expression unreadable. When Naomi looked at her watch, his eyes followed the motion. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Across the room, the younger officer noticed. His gaze flicked from the maintenance worker to Naomi, then back to Reeves. His lips parted slightly, as if he wanted to say something again. He didn't. Reeves crossed his arms. "You got something to say? Say it," he challenged. Naomi shook her head once. "Not yet." The words were quiet, almost gentle, but they carried weight. Reeves let out a short laugh, turning away from her as if dismissing the entire exchange. "That's what I thought." He waved toward the hallway. "Go on. We'll deal with you upstairs if we have to." Naomi didn't move right away. She stood there for a moment longer, feeling the eyes on her, the curiosity, the discomfort, the quiet judgment, the quiet sympathy that never became action. Then she stepped forward. One step, then another. Her shoes made soft sounds against the marble now, almost swallowed by the space around her. She passed the row of benches, the security desk, the metal detector that had never once reacted to her presence. As she walked, people shifted out of her path, not because they were told to, because something about her made them. Behind her, Reeves was already talking to another officer, his voice loud again, confident again, as if the moment had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. But every now and then, his eyes flicked back toward her, just to make sure she was still walking away. Naomi reached the hallway that led deeper into the courthouse. The air there was quieter, the sounds of the lobby fading behind her. She stopped once more, turned her wrist, looked at her watch again. 11:56. She adjusted the band slightly, then lowered her arm. Her reflection caught briefly in the polished metal of a nearby door. Coat, bag, steady posture, a face that revealed nothing it didn't choose to reveal. She held that reflection for a second. Then she moved on. Behind her, the lobby slowly returned to motion. But not to normal, because something had shifted, something no one could quite name yet. And the people who had watched, really watched, knew it wasn't over. Not even close. The question wasn't whether something would happen. It was when. But that moment, the one quietly building inside the courthouse walls, had not begun there. Hours earlier, the city had still been wrapped in a gray winter morning, the kind that pressed low against the rooftops and made everything feel smaller than it was. Southside Chicago stirred slowly under that sky. Buses exhaled at corners. Steam rose from manhole covers. The cold carried the scent of yesterday's rain and something faintly metallic from the train tracks nearby. Naomi Brooks stood outside a small brick building with a faded sign that read, "Community Kitchen" in peeling white paint. The front door stuck slightly when opened, and it always made a soft scraping sound against the concrete floor. She pushed it open with her shoulder, balancing a tray of paper cups filled with hot coffee. Inside, the warmth hit first, then the sound. Low voices, chairs shifting, someone laughing softly at something that wasn't quite a joke, but close enough. "Morning, Ms. Brooks," called a man from the corner table, his coat draped over his shoulders, even indoors. "Morning, Earl," Naomi replied, setting the tray down carefully. "You're early today." Earl shrugged. "Didn't sleep much." Naomi nodded like she understood without needing the details. She always did that. She didn't press. She didn't ask more than people were ready to give. At the far end of the room, a young boy sat alone, his feet not quite reaching the floor from the chair. His jacket was too thin for the weather, the zipper broken halfway down. He watched the room with wide eyes, clutching a plastic spoon in one hand. Naomi noticed him immediately. She poured another cup of coffee, then paused, switching it out for a cup of hot chocolate instead. She walked over, her steps unhurried. "Mind if I sit?" she asked. The boy shook his head quickly. "What's your name?" she said, placing the cup in front of him. "Marcus," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's a strong name," Naomi said with a small smile. "You here with someone, Marcus?" He hesitated, then looked down at the table. "My mom, she had to go somewhere." Naomi didn't ask where. She didn't need to. She had heard enough stories to recognize the shape of this one. "Well," she said gently, "you picked a good place to wait." Marcus nodded, wrapping his hands around the warm cup like it was something to hold on to. Across the room, a volunteer struggled to carry a heavy box of canned goods toward the storage shelf. Naomi rose without a word and moved to help, lifting one side of the box with practiced ease. "You're here early," the volunteer said, slightly out of breath. "Had some time," Naomi replied. That wasn't entirely true. She had made time, because this place, this small room with its chipped tables and mismatched chairs, was one of the few spaces where people didn't have to prove anything to be treated like they mattered. Naomi moved through the kitchen with quiet purpose, refilling cups, straightening chairs, checking in on people without making it feel like checking. A woman near the window wiped her eyes discreetly. Naomi placed a napkin beside her without saying anything, just resting her hand briefly on the edge of the table. "Thank you," the woman whispered. Naomi nodded once. "You're all right," she said. Those two words carried more weight than they sounded. Near the door, a stack of coats hung on a rack. Naomi adjusted one that had slipped halfway to the floor, brushing dust from the sleeve before placing it back properly. Small things. Always the small things. At 10:30, she stepped into the narrow hallway that led to the back office. The fluorescent light flickered once before settling. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it for just a moment. The room was quiet. On the desk sat a neatly organized stack of folders, each labeled in careful handwriting. Beside them, her handbag. And next to that, a folded document inside a plain envelope. Naomi crossed the room and picked up the envelope. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. Her fingers traced the edge of it, feeling the weight, not just of the paper, but of what it represented. For a moment, her shoulders lowered slightly, as if the stillness allowed something heavier to surface. Then she exhaled. Slow, controlled. She set the envelope back down and reached for her coat. In the small mirror hanging crooked on the wall, she caught her reflection. The same coat she wore every winter. The same lines at the corners of her eyes, carved not just by age but by years of holding herself together when things tried to pull her apart. There had been times, years ago, when rooms like the courthouse didn't feel like places she could walk into without being questioned. When doors closed quietly before she even reached them. When people spoke around her instead of to her. She had learned to keep her voice steady anyway. Learned to stand in spaces that weren't built with her in mind. Learned that dignity wasn't something given. It was something you carried. Naomi adjusted the collar of her coat, smoothing it down with both hands. Then she reached for her watch, tightening the strap slightly around her wrist. 10:47. She was right on time. Back in the main room, Marcus was still at the table, now eating slowly, carefully, as if trying to make the meal last longer. Naomi walked over and placed a small paper bag beside him. "For later," she said. Marcus looked up. "You don't have to, I know," she replied, "but I want to." He nodded, holding the bag close. "Will you be here when my mom gets back?" he asked. Naomi hesitated for just a fraction of a second. No, she said gently. But there will be people here who'll look out for you, just like I am right now. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, then nodded again. Okay. Naomi gave his shoulder a light squeeze, then stood. As she moved toward the door, Earl called out, "You heading somewhere important?" Naomi paused, her hand on the door handle. "Yes," she said. Earl smiled faintly. "Well, you go handle it then." Naomi returned the smile. "I intend to." Outside, the cold air wrapped around her again, sharper now, the sky still heavy with clouds. She pulled her coat tighter and stepped onto the sidewalk. Cars passed in steady streams. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, then faded. Naomi walked toward the bus stop, her pace unhurried but purposeful. She didn't check her phone. She didn't look around to see who might be watching. She simply moved forward, because whatever waited for her that morning, she had already decided she would meet it standing. The hallway leading deeper into the courthouse narrowed just enough to quiet the noise from the lobby behind her. The echo of raised voices, the shuffle of restless feet, the low hum of tension, all of it faded into a distant murmur as Naomi Brooks moved forward. The air felt different here, cooler, more controlled. Fluorescent lights stretched overhead in a straight, unwavering line, casting pale reflections along the polished floor. Doors lined both sides of the corridor, each marked with brass numbers and small placards that meant something to the people who worked here and very little to those who didn't. Naomi walked past them without hesitation. Her pace didn't change, her posture didn't falter. But behind her, the moment she had left was still moving. Back in the lobby, Reeves let out a sharp breath through his nose, watching the hallway where Naomi had disappeared. For a second, just a second, something in his expression tightened. Not uncertainty. Not yet. Something closer to irritation that hadn't settled properly. "Sir?" the younger officer said carefully. "Those papers she had, they looked legit." Reeves didn't turn. "You get paid to check documents now or to run a scanner?" he shot back. The younger officer straightened. "Yes, sir." "Then stick to your job." Reeves rolled his shoulders once, as if shaking off the residue of the interaction. He reached for his radio, clipped to his shoulder, pressing the button with more force than necessary. "Control, this is checkpoint 2, he said. "I've got a possible issue. Female subject, mid-40s, heading toward interior courtrooms. I want eyes on her." A pause crackled through the line. "Copy that," came the reply. "Any reason for concern?" Reeves hesitated. He could have said it plainly. He could have mentioned the documents, the behavior, the fact that nothing had technically set off an alarm. Instead, he chose something else. "Just doesn't feel right," he said. There was another pause, slightly longer this time. "Understood," the voice responded. "We'll alert interior security." Reeves lowered the radio, his jaw tightening. Behind him, the line resumed its slow movement. People stepped forward, placed their belongings on the belt, passed through the metal detector as if nothing unusual had happened. But the energy had shifted. Conversations stayed lower now. Eyes lingered longer than they should have. A man in a gray coat leaned toward the woman beside him. "Did you see that?" he whispered. She nodded, her lips pressed thin. "Yeah. Someone should say something." She looked at him. "Then say it." He didn't. Near the far wall, the maintenance worker who had been watching earlier pushed his cart slowly toward the exit. His phone was no longer in his hand. It had already been used. He glanced once toward the hallway Naomi had taken. Then he kept moving. Up ahead, Naomi reached a junction where the corridor split in two directions. A small sign pointed left toward courtrooms 3 through 7 and right toward administrative offices. She didn't slow down. She turned left. A security camera mounted high in the corner followed the movement with a subtle mechanical shift. Its lens adjusted, refocusing as she passed beneath it. Naomi noticed. Not with her eyes, but with something quieter. A sense built from years of being observed, assessed, measured. She kept walking. Her hand brushed lightly against her handbag, feeling for the edge of the folder inside. It was still there, still aligned, still exactly where she had placed it. Her watch caught the light as she moved. 11:57. 3 minutes. At the far end of the corridor, a set of double doors stood partially open. Beyond them, the faint murmur of a courtroom could be heard, voices low, controlled, the cadence of procedure unfolding. Naomi approached, then paused just before reaching them, not out of hesitation, out of precision. She adjusted her coat again, smoothing the fabric down the front. Her fingers lingered briefly near the collar, then dropped. Behind her, footsteps echoed, faster this time, purposeful. "Ma'am." The voice came from behind her, sharp enough to cut through the quiet. Naomi turned. 2 uniformed officers approached, their expressions firm but not yet confrontational. One of them, taller, older, held his hand near his belt, not resting on it, but close enough to signal readiness. "We're going to need you to come with us," he said. Naomi met his gaze. "On what grounds?" "Routine verification," the officer replied. "We just need to make sure everything checks out." Naomi nodded once. "You've already had that opportunity." The officer shifted slightly. "Ma'am, we're asking you to cooperate." "I am cooperating," Naomi said. "I walked through your checkpoint. I provided documentation." The second officer stepped forward. "Look, we don't want this to turn into something bigger than it needs to be." Naomi's expression remained calm. "Neither do I." There it was again, that same stillness. Not resistance, not compliance. Something in between that made it difficult to push and impossible to ignore. The taller officer exhaled slowly. "We've been told to escort you," he said. "So that's what we're going to do." Naomi considered him for a moment. Then she glanced at her watch again. 11:58. 2 minutes. "All right," she said. The officers seemed almost relieved by the response. "Thank you," the taller one said, stepping aside slightly to guide her back down the corridor. Naomi didn't move. "Not yet." "I'll walk with you," she said. "But I won't be rushed." The officer nodded. "That's fine." They began moving together, their footsteps echoing in measured rhythm. Back in the lobby, Reeves watched as the 2 officers appeared at the far end of the hallway, with Naomi between them. His posture straightened immediately, a flicker of satisfaction crossing his face. "Thought so," he muttered under his breath. As they approached, the tension in the room thickened again. Phones rose once more. People leaned just slightly, trying to see without being seen. Naomi walked between the officers without resistance, her pace unchanged, her gaze forward. Reeves stepped forward to meet them. "What's the situation?" he asked. "Just bringing her back for verification," the taller officer replied. Reeves nodded, his eyes fixed on Naomi. "Told you," he said. Something wasn't right. Naomi turned her head just enough to look at him. Not fully, just enough. "You're still not looking," she said. Reeves frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Naomi didn't answer. Instead, she shifted her wrist again. 11:59. The second hand moved, slow, precise, one tick at a time, Around them, the lobby seemed to hold its breath without knowing why. Even Reeves felt it now. Not fear. Not yet. But something that made him glance just briefly toward the entrance doors. Nothing. Just the same steady flow of people coming and going. He looked back at Naomi. "Let's finish this," he said. Naomi's eyes met his fully this time. Calm. Certain. Waiting. And somewhere, deep beneath the surface of the moment, something was already in motion. Something that didn't need permission to arrive. Something that had been on its way long before any of them realized it. The second hand on Naomi's watch reached the top and stopped. At 12. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. No sound. No movement. Not even the faint rustle of coats or the soft shuffle of shoes across the marble floor. The entire courthouse lobby seemed to hold its breath, suspended in a stillness so complete it felt unnatural. Naomi Brooks didn't move. Her eyes remained steady, fixed somewhere beyond the man standing in front of her, beyond the officers at her sides, beyond the cluster of people watching with quiet unease. Her hand rested lightly against her bag, her wrist still angled just enough for the watch to catch the overhead light. 12. Reeves noticed it too. Not the time, but the stillness. It crept in slowly, like a draft under a door. Something subtle. Something just off enough to register without explanation. His shoulders shifted. A small adjustment meant to shake off the feeling. "All right," he said, louder than necessary. "Let's wrap this up." His voice cracked slightly at the end, though he didn't seem to notice. The taller officer beside Naomi glanced at him, then at her, then back again, as if unsure which direction to follow. "Sir," he said, keeping his tone measured, "we're just confirming—" "I already told you what this is," Reeves cut in. "She doesn't check out." Naomi's gaze moved to him then, slow and deliberate. "You still haven't read them," she said. Reeves exhaled sharply. "I don't need to." A murmur rippled through the crowd, not loud enough to break the surface, but enough to shift it. Behind the security desk, the younger officer who had spoken earlier stared down at the console in front of him, his fingers hovering over the keys. His jaw tightened, his foot tapping lightly against the floor. He knew. Everyone knew. But knowing wasn't the same as acting. And acting, that was the part no one seemed willing to do. Near the benches, a woman lowered her phone, her expression conflicted. She looked toward Naomi, then at Reeves, then back at Naomi again, as if searching for permission to speak. She didn't find it. Or maybe she didn't give it to herself. A man in a tailored coat leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his gaze sharp but distant. He had seen enough situations like this to recognize the shape of it. The tension, the imbalance, the unspoken rule that said this was not his place to interfere. So he stayed where he was, watched, just like everyone else. Naomi turned her head slightly, her eyes sweeping the room, not accusing, not pleading, just seeing, taking it in, the faces, the silence, the choice. She didn't linger on any one person for long. She didn't need to. The pattern was clear enough. Reeves shifted again, irritation rising beneath the surface. "What are you looking at?" he snapped. Naomi brought her gaze back to him. "The room," she said simply. Reeves scoffed. "Yeah? And what do you see?" Naomi paused, not because she didn't have an answer, because she chose it carefully. "I see people who know better," she said. The words were quiet, but they landed. A few heads turned away immediately, as if the statement itself had weight they didn't want to carry. Reeves let out a short laugh, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You think this is about them?" he said. This is about you. Naomi tilted her head slightly. Is it? That unsettled him. Not enough to stop, but enough to push harder. Listen, he said, stepping closer again, his voice dropping low. I don't know what you're trying to pull, but it's not going to work here. You don't get to walk in and act like you own the place. Naomi didn't step back, didn't flinch. I never said I did, she replied. Then start acting like you don't, Reeves shot back. Another beat of silence. Longer this time. He expected something. Anger, frustration, maybe even fear. He got none of it. Instead, Naomi simply stood there, her posture unchanged, her presence steady in a way that didn't fit the situation. It didn't fit his narrative, and that made it harder to control. Behind them, the maintenance worker had stopped moving entirely. His cart sat idle near the wall, one wheel turned slightly outward. His eyes were fixed on the entrance doors now, not on Naomi, not on Reeves. Waiting. The younger officer at the console followed his gaze, almost unconsciously. He didn't know why, but something told him to look. The glass doors at the far end of the lobby reflected the gray sky outside. People moved beyond them. Blurred shapes, coats, umbrellas, the rhythm of the city continuing without pause. For a moment, it looked like nothing would change. Then, the doors opened. Not with force, not dramatically. Just opened. 3 figures stepped inside. Dark suits, clean lines, no hesitation. They didn't pause to scan the room, didn't slow to orient themselves. They walked with the kind of certainty that came from already knowing exactly where they were going. Reeves didn't notice them right away. He was still focused on Naomi, still trying to push the moment back into something he understood. Last chance, he said. Either you come with us quietly, or we make this official. Naomi held his gaze. I've been cooperating, she said. That's not what I... Excuse me. The voice cut cleanly through the space. Not loud, but precise. It didn't ask for attention. It took it. Reeves turned, irritation already forming in his expression. What is it? He snapped, not yet seeing who had spoken. The 3 figures were closer now. One of them, a tall man with a calm, composed demeanor, stepped forward slightly. Step aside, he said. Reeves frowned. You need to wait your turn like everyone else. The man didn't react to the tone, didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He simply repeated, Step aside. Something in the room shifted again, more noticeably this time. The kind of shift that didn't come from words, but from presence. Reeves hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Then he squared his shoulders. I said. The man reached into his jacket and produced a badge. Not flashed, not waved, just held. Close enough, clear enough. Reeves's voice stopped mid-sentence. The younger officer at the console leaned forward slightly, his eyes widening. The maintenance worker exhaled slowly, as if releasing a breath he had been holding for minutes. Around the room, people leaned, not physically, but mentally, toward the moment unfolding. The tall man didn't look at Reeves again. He stepped past him and kept walking. The other 2 followed. They didn't glance at the crowd, didn't acknowledge the tension, didn't react to the phones still recording. They walked straight across the marble floor, their footsteps measured, controlled, direct, toward Naomi. And for the first time since the moment began, Reeves wasn't the center of the room anymore. He turned slowly, watching them move past him, something unfamiliar beginning to settle in his chest. Not fear, not yet, but something that felt a lot like the edge of it. Naomi didn't move, didn't step forward, didn't step back. She simply waited. because whatever had just entered that room, she had been expecting it. The three agents didn't slow. They didn't hesitate. They didn't ask for permission. They walked straight across the polished marble floor, as if every step had already been cleared long before they arrived. Their shoes made a soft, steady rhythm, measured, controlled, undeniable. The crowd parted without being told, not dramatically, not all at once, just enough space opening, one person shifting, then another, until a quiet path formed between them and Naomi. Reeves turned fully now, his body angling toward them, his authority snapping back into place like a reflex. "Hey," he called out, sharp and firm. "You can't just walk in here like—" He stopped. Not because they told him to, because they didn't. The tall agent in front didn't even look at him. He passed by. Close enough that Reeves could see the small crease in his suit sleeve, the subtle shine of a badge clipped just inside the jacket. But not once did the man break stride. It wasn't defiance. It was something worse. Dismissal. The kind that didn't need to announce itself. Reeves's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. His hand hovered near his radio, uncertain for the first time since the moment began. The other two agents followed just behind, their focus equally fixed. Not on the room, not on the officers. On Naomi. The taller officer who had been escorting her shifted his stance, stepping slightly to the side without realizing he had done it. The younger officer beside him straightened instinctively, his eyes flicking from Reeves to the approaching figures. No one spoke. No one gave orders. And yet, control had already started to move. Naomi didn't move. She stood exactly where she had been, her posture unchanged, her presence steady as the agents approached. The distance between them closed. 10 feet. 5. 3. The tall agent stopped in front of her. For a brief moment, the entire room seemed to narrow down to that single point. Then he spoke. "Ma'am." One word. Respectful. Clear. Everything Reeves's voice had not been. Naomi met his eyes. "Yes," she said. There was no surprise in her voice, no relief, just recognition. The agent gave a slight nod, as if confirming something already known. "We've been looking for you." Behind them, Reeves let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Looking for her?" he repeated. "You've got to be kidding me." The agent didn't turn, didn't acknowledge him. He kept his attention on Naomi. "We're running a few minutes behind," he said. "They're waiting upstairs." Naomi glanced at her watch again. 12:01. "Understood," she replied. Reeves stepped forward now, his voice rising, trying to reclaim ground that had already slipped. "Hold on," he said. "You don't just walk in here and take someone without clearance. She's under verification." The second agent shifted slightly, just enough to place himself between Reeves and Naomi without making it obvious. "Verification has been handled," he said calmly. Reeves frowned. "By who?" The agent finally turned his head. Slowly, and for the first time, his gaze landed on Reeves. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't aggressive. It was final. "Not by you," he said. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. Reeves felt something tighten in his chest, something small but unmistakable. He looked from one agent to the next, then back to Naomi. "What is this?" he demanded. "Who is she?" Naomi didn't answer. She didn't step forward. She didn't step back. She simply stood there, letting the question exist without rushing to fill it. Around them, the crowd leaned in again, but this time the energy had changed. Phones were still up, but hands weren't as steady. Whispers weren't as confident. A woman near the benches lowered her phone completely, her eyes widening as she took in the shift she couldn't yet explain. The maintenance worker by the wall folded his arms, watching with quiet understanding. He had seen enough to know Reeves hadn't. Not yet. "Sir," the taller escorting officer said, his voice lower now, less certain. "Maybe we should—" "No," Reeves snapped. "We don't move until I know what's going on." The tall agent in front of Naomi tilted his head slightly, as if weighing whether the conversation required further engagement. It didn't. "We're not here to brief you," he said. Reeves took another step forward. "Then you're not taking her." That did it. Not in the way Reeves expected. The third agent, quiet until now, reached into his jacket and produced a small black credential case. He opened it just enough for the contents to be seen. Not flashed. Not emphasized. Just present. Close enough. Clear enough. The effect was immediate. The taller escorting officer stepped back without being told. The younger officer at the console looked away, his posture tightening. Even the murmurs in the crowd seemed to thin out, replaced by a heavier kind of silence, the kind that came when something official entered the room without needing to announce itself. Reeves stared at the credential for a fraction too long. His jaw worked slightly, his eyes narrowing. Then he straightened. "I still need—" "You've done enough," the agent said. No raised voice, no threat, just a statement. Reeves felt it. The line. Drawn without permission. For the first time, he didn't immediately push back. He glanced around the room, as if looking for support, for confirmation that he was still the one in control. No one met his eyes. Not the officers. Not the crowd. Not even the people who had been watching from the beginning. They were still watching. But now they were watching something else. Naomi shifted her weight slightly, the smallest movement in the room, yet it drew attention more than anything else. The tall agent stepped aside just enough to give her space. "Whenever you're ready," he said. Naomi nodded. She turned her head once more, her gaze finding Reeves. Not sharp, not cold, just steady. "You should have checked," she said again. This time there was no question in the words, no suggestion, only truth. Reeves opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Because somewhere beneath the surface something had already begun to unravel. He just didn't know how far it would go. Naomi stepped forward. The agents moved with her, not around her, with her. And as they walked toward the interior hallway, something in the room shifted completely. Not loudly, not visibly, but undeniably. Because the question wasn't who she was anymore. It was what everyone else had just missed. The lobby didn't return to normal. It couldn't. Even after Naomi Brooks began walking toward the interior hallway, escorted not by force but by presence, the air she left behind stayed altered, like a room after a storm passes, quiet but not settled. Reeves stood where she had left him. Still. His hands hung at his sides, not quite clenched, not quite relaxed. His eyes followed her as she moved, flanked by the three agents who hadn't once asked his permission for anything. He swallowed. Harder than he meant to. "What the hell was that?" he muttered, mostly to himself. No one answered. The taller escorting officer shifted his weight, glancing between Reeves and the hallway where Naomi had disappeared. "Sir, those weren't courthouse security," he said carefully. Reeves shot him a look. "I know that." But his voice didn't carry the same certainty it had minutes ago. Behind them, the crowd didn't disperse. If anything, it grew tighter. People leaned closer to one another, voices low but urgent now. "Did you see that badge? Who were they?" They didn't even look at him. Phones were still recording, but the angle had changed. Not focused on Naomi anymore. She was gone from view, but on Reeves, on what he would do next. That was the part everyone was waiting for now. Reeves felt it. The shift, the attention that had once been centered around him as the authority in the room, now watching him as something else. Evaluated, measured. For a moment, he didn't move. Then instinct kicked in. He reached for his radio again, pressing the button too quickly this time. "Control," he said. "I need confirmation on 3 individuals. Plainclothes just entered the building. They're escorting a subject through interior access without clearance." A pause crackled through the speaker. Longer than before. "Stand by," the voice replied. Reeves's jaw tightened. He glanced toward the hallway again, then back at the crowd. A few people quickly looked away when his eyes met theirs. Others didn't. That bothered him more. Because before, they had. Before, they had avoided him. Now they were watching. Not afraid. Just watching. He turned away from them, pacing a few steps toward the security desk. The younger officer looked up at him. "Sir, should we—" "Just stay on your station," Reeves snapped. The younger officer nodded, but his eyes flicked toward the hallway again. Reeves noticed. He noticed everything now. Every glance, every hesitation, every tiny crack in the control he thought he had. The radio crackled again. "Checkpoint 2, the voice said. "We're confirming presence of federal personnel in the building. You are not to interfere." Reeves froze. For a split second, he thought he had misheard. "Say that again," he said. "You are not to interfere," the voice repeated. "Stand down." Reeves stared at the radio in his hand, then slowly lowered it. Around him, the room seemed to lean in again, even without moving. Someone near the back whispered, "Federal?" Another voice followed, quieter. "For her?" Reeves looked toward the hallway one more time, and for the first time since the morning began, something in his chest shifted into something he couldn't push down. Not anger, not frustration. Something colder. Doubt. Meanwhile, down the interior corridor, Naomi walked at the same measured pace she had held since she entered the building. The agents didn't rush her, didn't guide her. They simply moved with her, matching her rhythm step for step. One of them, shorter, with a calm, steady presence, glanced at her briefly. "Apologies for the delay," he said. "Security clearance took longer than expected." Naomi nodded. "It happens." Her voice held no edge, no accusation. As if the delay had been nothing more than an inconvenience. As if everything that had just occurred in the lobby had not shaken her at all. They reached a secured door. One of the agents swiped a card, the lock clicking open with a soft mechanical sound. Beyond it, the courthouse shifted again. Quieter. More controlled. The kind of space where decisions were made, not just processed. Naomi stepped through. Inside, the lighting softened slightly, less harsh than the lobby. The hallway here was carpeted, the sound of footsteps muted, absorbed. A woman in a dark suit looked up from a desk as they approached. Her expression changed immediately when she saw Naomi. "Ma'am," she said, standing. Naomi gave a small nod. "Good afternoon." The woman hesitated, then added, "They're ready for you." Naomi glanced at her watch again. 12:04. Right on time. Behind her, the agent stepped back slightly, giving her space. Not because they had to, because it was understood. Naomi adjusted her coat once more, smoothing it down the front. The same small gesture, the same quiet precision. Then she moved forward, toward the set of double doors at the end of the corridor. Inside those doors, voices could be heard, measured, formal, waiting. Back in the lobby, Reeves remained where he was, the radio still in his hand. He looked down at it again, as if expecting it to say something different this time. It didn't. "Stand down." The words echoed in his mind. He glanced around the room once more. The same people. The same space. But nothing felt the same. Because the question that had started as a quiet curiosity had now become something else entirely. Not just who she was, but how far above him she might actually be, and more importantly, what came next. Because whatever had just shifted, it wasn't finished. Not even close. Inside the corridor beyond the secured doors, the courthouse carried a different kind of silence, one that didn't come from fear or hesitation, but from structure. Every sound was contained. Every movement had a purpose. Naomi Brooks walked forward, her steps softened by the carpet beneath her feet. The agents stayed just behind and slightly to the side, never crowding her, never leading her, simply present. Ahead, the double doors to the courtroom stood closed. A brass plate beside them read, "Federal Hearing Room A." The same room Reeves had assumed she didn't belong anywhere near. Naomi paused just short of the doors, not out of uncertainty, out of awareness. The agent nearest to her leaned in slightly. "They've been waiting," he said quietly. Naomi gave a small nod. "I know." Behind her, the agents exchanged a brief glance. Not confusion, not concern, just acknowledgement. Whatever timeline had been set, she had followed it exactly. The door opened from the inside. A clerk in a dark blazer stepped out, her eyes immediately landing on Naomi. Her posture straightened, her voice shifting as if adjusting to something she recognized. "Ma'am," she said, stepping aside quickly. "We're ready for you." Naomi moved forward without hesitation. Inside, the courtroom was already full, not with spectators, but with people who held positions. Lawyers, officials, individuals who carried authority in the way they sat, the way they spoke, the way they waited. Voices that had been murmuring moments before stopped, not gradually, all at once, because Naomi had entered. She didn't rush. She didn't look around to see who noticed. She simply walked down the center aisle, her coat brushing lightly against the backs of polished wooden benches, her presence steady in a room built on judgment and precision. At the front, a panel of attorneys stood. One of them, a middle-aged man with silver hair and sharp features, checked his watch, then looked up. Finally, he muttered under his breath, though not with irritation, with relief. A woman beside him leaned slightly closer. "Is that—" "Yes," he replied quietly. "That's her." Naomi reached the front. The agents stopped several steps behind her, positioning themselves near the wall. Again, not guarding her, not escorting her, just there. The distinction mattered. A court officer approached Naomi. "Please," he said, gesturing toward the front. Naomi removed her coat, folding it neatly over her arm before handing it off without a word. Underneath, her attire remained simple, clean, professional, unremarkable at first glance, until it wasn't. Because the way the room responded to her didn't match what she wore. It matched something else, something they knew. She stepped forward and took her place. Not at the benches, not in the gallery, at the front. The clerk glanced toward the bench, then back at Naomi. "We can begin," she said. A quiet shift moved through the room. Papers straightened, chairs adjusted, people prepared themselves. Because whatever this proceeding was, it had not been able to start without her. Back in the lobby, the shift was slower, but just as real. Reeves stood near the security checkpoint, his arms now crossed tightly, his posture rigid in a way that looked less like control and more like resistance. "What do you mean, stand down?" he said into his radio, his voice low but tense. "I need clarification on who authorized—" "Officer Reeves," the voice on the other end interrupted. "That's not your concern." Reeves froze. He lowered the radio slightly, staring at it as if it had betrayed him. "Not my concern?" he repeated. "Correct," the voice replied. "Resume standard duties." The line went quiet. Reeves looked up. The room hadn't moved on. Not really. People were still watching him, waiting. Not for authority, for reaction. The younger officer behind the desk shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, maybe we should just—" Reeves slammed the radio down onto the counter harder than necessary. "I heard what they said," he snapped. The younger officer fell silent immediately. Reeves exhaled, running a hand down his face. His thoughts moved fast now, trying to piece together something that made sense. Federal agents. No interference. A woman he had just dismissed, being escorted like she mattered. No, like she was expected. He glanced toward the entrance doors again, then toward the hallway, then back at the crowd. Something didn't add up, and he hated not being the one who understood first. Near the benches, the woman who had been filming earlier lowered her phone completely now. "Did you hear that?" she whispered to the man beside her. He nodded. "They said federal." She looked toward the hallway. "For her?" The man didn't answer. Because he didn't know. No one did. But the question itself had already changed. It wasn't, "Who does she think she is?" It was, "What did we just witness?" Reeves pushed away from the counter, taking a few steps toward the hallway. The taller officer who had escorted Naomi stepped in front of him. "Sir," he said carefully, "we've been instructed not to interfere." Reeves stopped. His eyes narrowed slightly. "And I've been here 10 years, he replied. "I don't get told to stand down without a reason." The officer held his ground. "Then maybe there's a reason," he said. Reeves stared at him for a long moment. The implication hung there, heavy, uncomfortable, unavoidable. For the first time, Reeves didn't push past him. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just stopped. Because somewhere, deep under the surface of everything he thought he knew about control, authority, and who belonged where, something had shifted, and it wasn't shifting back. Inside the courtroom, Naomi stood at the front, her hands resting lightly against the edge of the table. The room waited, not impatiently, not uncertainly, just ready. Because the moment had arrived, and everyone who mattered knew it. The only person who didn't was still standing out in the lobby, trying to figure out how he had already lost control of something he didn't even understand yet. Inside the courtroom, the silence had a different weight. It wasn't the uneasy quiet of bystanders holding their breath. It was the controlled stillness of people who knew exactly how much power a moment could carry, and were waiting to see how it would unfold. Naomi Brooks stood at the front table, her hands resting lightly against the polished wood. The overhead lights cast a soft reflection across the surface, catching the edge of her watch as she adjusted her wrist slightly. 12:06, right on schedule. Across the room, a row of attorneys exchanged glances. One of them leaned toward another, whispering something too low to be heard. But the meaning traveled anyway, through posture, through the subtle shift of attention, through the way eyes kept returning to Naomi as if confirming what they already suspected. At the far end, a judge's clerk moved quickly, organizing papers, checking notes, her usual routine sharpened by something just beneath the surface. "Are we ready?" she asked quietly. No one answered right away. Because readiness wasn't the question. Recognition was. Naomi reached into her bag and removed her folder, placing it neatly on the table. She opened it with the same careful precision she had used all morning, aligning the edges, smoothing the pages. Nothing about her movements suggested urgency. Nothing suggested uncertainty. Only familiarity. The kind that didn't come from visiting a place, but from belonging in it. At the side of the room, one of the agents stepped forward just enough to address a court officer. His voice stayed low, but the effect was immediate. The officer nodded, straightened, and moved toward the bench. A moment later, the side door opened. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Chairs shifted, fabric rustled, the room rising in a single, unified motion. Naomi stood with them, but when the judge's eyes moved across the room, they didn't pass over her. They stopped. Just for a second. Long enough to register. Then the judge took his seat. "Please be seated," he said. The room followed, except for Naomi. She remained standing, not out of defiance, not out of confusion, because she hadn't been told otherwise. A small pause settled into the space. The clerk glanced at the judge, then back at Naomi, uncertainty flickering briefly across her face. "Ma'am," she said carefully, "you may—" The judge lifted a hand slightly, not sharply, not abruptly, just enough to stop the sentence. "It's all right," he said. The clerk fell silent. Naomi held her position for another moment, then took her seat at the front table. Not in the gallery, not behind counsel. At the table, across from an empty chair. A man in a dark suit leaned toward his colleague again, his voice barely audible. "That's her," he said. His colleague frowned. "You're sure?" The man nodded. "I've seen the file." The word file moved like a quiet ripple through the room, not spoken aloud, but understood. Back in the lobby, Reeves paced. 3 steps one direction. Turn. 3 steps back. His boots struck the marble with a sharper rhythm now, less controlled than before. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered under his breath. The younger officer watched him, unsure whether to speak. "Sir," he started. Reeves stopped. "What?" he snapped. I've never seen federal agents move like that for someone like—" He stopped himself. Reeves caught it anyway. "For someone like what?" he pressed. The younger officer swallowed. "I mean, she didn't look, like she belonged?" Reeves finished. The words hung there, heavy, uncomfortable. The younger officer didn't answer. He didn't need to. Reeves exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah," he said. "Exactly." But even as he said it, something in his voice lacked conviction, because the image didn't match anymore. The woman he had stopped. The woman he had dismissed. The woman he had struck was now being escorted through secured access by federal personnel who didn't answer to him, didn't even acknowledge him. That didn't happen. Not here. Not in his building. And yet, it had. He turned toward the hallway again. For the first time, he considered moving, not to assert control, but to follow. Then the radio at his side crackled again. "Checkpoint 2, the voice said. Reeves grabbed it immediately. "Yeah, you are to remain at your post," the voice continued. "Repeat, remain at your post." Reeves frowned. "I didn't say I was." "Remain at your post," the voice repeated, firmer this time. The line went quiet. Reeves lowered the radio slowly. He wasn't being updated. He wasn't being informed. He was being contained. Inside the courtroom, the clerk cleared her throat softly. "We are ready to proceed," she said. Naomi looked up. "Good," she replied. Her voice carried, not loudly, but clearly enough that it reached every corner of the room. The judge nodded once. "For the record," he said, "please state your name." Naomi paused, just long enough for the room to settle again. Then she spoke. "Naomi Brooks." A simple answer. A name they had already heard, but not yet understood. The judge leaned forward slightly. "And your capacity in these proceedings?" Another pause. This one deliberate, measured. Naomi's gaze moved briefly across the room, over the attorneys, the officials, the people who had been waiting for her without fully knowing why. Then back to the judge. "I believe that will become clear," she said. "No title, no explanation, just certainty, the kind that didn't need to prove itself." Across the room, the silver-haired attorney leaned back in his chair, a faint smile crossing his face. Because he knew. And he knew that in just a matter of moments, everyone else would too. Back in the lobby, Reeves stood still again, not pacing anymore, not speaking, just waiting for something he could finally understand. But the truth was already moving, already unfolding, and it wasn't waiting for him to catch up. Because the question had changed. Not just who she was, but how completely they had gotten her wrong. The courtroom didn't erupt. It didn't gasp. It didn't react the way rooms usually did when something important was revealed. Because nothing had been announced. And yet, everything had changed. Naomi Brooks sat at the front table, her folder open, her hands resting calmly on either side of it. No badge had been flashed. No title had been spoken. No one had stood up and declared who she was. But the shift was undeniable. It moved through posture first, the way the attorneys straightened when she spoke, the way the clerk watched her, not with instruction, but with attention. The way the judge no longer glanced past her, but to her. It was subtle and absolute. "Proceed," the judge said. The silver-haired attorney rose immediately. "Your Honor," he began, his voice measured, respectful. "Before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge that we are now able to continue with all necessary parties present." Necessary. The word settled into the room with quiet weight. Naomi didn't react. She didn't nod, didn't smile. She simply listened. Across the table, a younger attorney, one who had been reviewing documents earlier with visible impatience, now sat still, his pen untouched in his hand. He leaned slightly toward his colleague. "You didn't tell me she'd be here," he whispered. His colleague didn't take his eyes off Naomi. "We weren't told," he replied. "Then how does everyone—" "Watch," the man said. And so he did. Naomi reached for a document in her folder, sliding it forward just enough to review a section. Her movements were calm, deliberate, nothing wasted, nothing rushed. She wasn't catching up, she wasn't preparing, she was continuing, as if everything had already been in motion long before she walked into that building. The clerk cleared her throat again. "We will now begin the oversight review session as scheduled," she said. Oversight. Another word. Another shift. It didn't echo. It didn't need to. Because now, pieces were starting to connect. Not loudly, not all at once, but enough. The silver-haired attorney glanced briefly toward Naomi. "Dr. Brooks," he said, almost instinctively. He stopped himself. But it was too late. The word had been spoken. Soft, accidental, but real. A few heads turned. The younger attorney's eyes widened slightly. "Doctor?" he murmured. Naomi didn't correct it. didn't confirm it. She simply turned a page in her folder and looked up. "Let's proceed," she said. The authority in her voice wasn't sharp. It wasn't forceful. It was expected. The kind of tone people responded to without questioning why. The judge nodded once. "Very well," he said. And just like that, the room moved. Documents were referenced. Statements began. The structure of the hearing unfolded. But every few seconds, attention returned to Naomi. Not because she demanded it, because she held it. Meanwhile, back in the lobby, Reeves stood still in a way that felt unfamiliar to him. Not still like control, still like waiting. The hallway beyond the checkpoint had gone quiet again, the earlier movement replaced by a kind of distance he couldn't cross. He looked toward it, then at the radio, then at the people. The crowd had thinned slightly, but not completely. A few remained, lingering just long enough to see how the story ended. Because it hadn't. "Not yet, sir," the younger officer said again, more carefully this time. "Maybe we should just let it go." Reeves turned to him slowly. "Let it go?" he repeated. The younger officer hesitated. "I mean, if federal's involved, and we've been told to stand down." Reeves stepped closer, not aggressively, but firmly enough to make the younger man stop talking. "You ever seen federal walk in like that for nothing?" Reeves asked. The younger officer shook his head. "No, sir." "Exactly," Reeves said. He looked back toward the hallway. "That means something's wrong." He didn't say it out loud, but the thought was already forming. Not with her. With him. Inside the courtroom, the tone had shifted fully now. The initial formalities were done. The real work had begun. A report was being read aloud, technical, precise, filled with language that carried weight even if not everyone understood every word. Naomi listened, not passively, actively. Her eyes moved across the page, tracking, confirming, aligning. Every so often she made a small note in the margin. Not corrections, observations. The silver-haired attorney paused mid-sentence, glancing toward her. "Would you like to add anything at this stage?" he asked. He didn't have to ask, but he did. Because now it was understood. Naomi looked up. The room stilled again. "I will," she said. 2 words, measured, certain. She closed her folder gently, placing both hands flat against it for a moment. Then she spoke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly enough that every person in the room leaned in just slightly. "Before we move further," she said, "I'd like to address a preliminary concern regarding procedural conduct at entry." The words were simple, but they landed differently, because suddenly, the timeline shifted. The morning wasn't behind them anymore. It had followed her in. Across the room, the younger attorney blinked. "Entry?" he whispered. His colleague didn't answer, because he already understood. Naomi's gaze didn't move. Her voice didn't change. But something in the room tightened, because whatever she was about to say wasn't just part of the hearing. It was about to reach back, to the lobby, to the moment, to the man who thought he had been in control. And for the first time, Reeves wasn't just outside the room. He was already inside the story unfolding within it. He just didn't know it yet. Inside the courtroom, Naomi Brooks didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Before we move forward," she said, her tone steady, "I'd like to document an incident that occurred at entry this morning." The words were simple, but they landed like a shift in gravity. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Go ahead." Naomi opened her folder again, this time pulling out a single sheet. Not thick, not dramatic, just one page among many. She placed it in front of her, fingertips resting lightly at the edges. At approximately 11:52 a.m., she continued, I was stopped at the primary security checkpoint. I presented valid credentials. Those credentials were not reviewed. Across the room, pens began to move, not casually, carefully. Instead, Naomi said, I was delayed, questioned without cause, and subjected to unnecessary escalation. She didn't elaborate. She didn't dramatize. She didn't need to, because the room understood what those words meant in a place like this. The silver-haired attorney shifted in his seat. Do you have documentation of this? He asked. Naomi nodded once. Security cameras, she replied. Lobby feed, 11:50 through 12 o'clock, audio included. A pause. Then, pull it, the judge said. No hesitation, no debate. A clerk moved quickly to the side console, typing with controlled urgency. Within seconds, the monitor at the front of the room flickered to life. Static. Then, the lobby. Cold fluorescent light. Marble floors. And there, Naomi. Walking in. The room watched. Not as spectators, as witnesses. Reeves appeared on screen, stepping into frame with the same confidence he had carried earlier that morning. The audio crackled slightly as his voice came through, dismissive, sharp, unchallenged. The exchange unfolded exactly as it had happened. Every word, every tone, every moment where Naomi remained calm while he pushed further. No interruption, no filter, no reinterpretation. The room didn't react immediately. It absorbed. And then, the moment, the motion of his arm, the contact. Not exaggerated, not replayed, just shown. Once. Clean, undeniable. The younger attorney across the table leaned back slowly, his face draining of color. Oh, he murmured under his breath. The silver-haired attorney didn't speak at all. He didn't need to. The judge's expression didn't change much, but his posture did. Straighter, firmer. The kind of shift that signaled something had moved from question to fact. Continue, he said. Naomi didn't look at the screen anymore. She didn't need to see it again. I complied with all instructions given, she said. At no point did I resist, escalate, or interfere with security procedure. Her voice remained even, measured. Despite that, she continued, the situation was allowed to develop into unnecessary physical contact and public delay of a scheduled federal proceeding. The word federal carried weight now, not implied, recognized. The clerk stopped typing for a moment, her fingers hovering above the keys as she processed what she was recording. The judge leaned back slightly. Do we have identification of the officer involved? Naomi didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her folder again and slid forward another document. Officer Daniel Reeves, she said. The name entered the room like a quiet detonation. Because now, it wasn't just an incident. It was a record. Back in the lobby, Reeves's radio crackled again. Checkpoint 2, the voice said. He picked it up instantly. Yeah. There was a pause on the other end, longer than before. Then, remain at your station. Internal Affairs is en route. Reeves froze. The words didn't register all at once. Say that again, he said, slower this time. Internal Affairs is en route, the voice repeated. Do not leave your post. The line went silent. Reeves lowered the radio. His hand didn't drop all the way this time. It stayed halfway, as if his body hadn't caught up with what he had just heard. Internal Affairs? The younger officer said quietly. Reeves didn't respond. He looked toward the hallway. then toward the entrance, then back at the people still lingering nearby. Some of them were no longer pretending not to watch. They were watching him now, directly, the same way they had watched Naomi. Except this time, the silence felt different, not passive, not uncertain. It carried something else. Recognition. Reeves shifted his weight, his shoulders tightening as if bracing against something he couldn't see yet. "What did you do?" the younger officer asked, not accusing, just trying to understand. Reeves didn't answer, because for the first time that day, he didn't have one. Inside the courtroom, the video ended. The screen went dark, but the moment didn't. It stayed, hanging in the air, documented, recorded, final. The judge looked down at the bench for a moment, then back up. "Let the record reflect," he said, "that the footage confirms procedural misconduct at the point of entry." Procedural misconduct, a phrase that sounded clinical, but carried consequences. The silver-haired attorney finally spoke. "Given the circumstances," he said carefully, "we may need to address the broader implications." Naomi shook her head slightly. "Not broader," she said. "Specific." The room stilled again. She met the judge's gaze directly. "This isn't about interpretation," she continued. "It's about accountability. No anger, no raised voice, just clarity, the kind that left no space for deflection." The judge nodded once, slow, decisive, understood. Across the room, the younger attorney set his pen down completely now, because he wasn't writing anymore. He was witnessing. The kind of moment that didn't just affect a case, it reshaped it. Back in the lobby, the front doors opened again. This time, no one missed it. Two individuals stepped inside. Not rushed, not dramatic, but unmistakable. Their presence didn't need explanation. Badges clipped, expressions neutral, eyes scanning. They moved with purpose, toward the checkpoint, toward Reeves, and for the first time since the morning began, Reeves didn't step forward to meet them. He didn't speak. He didn't assert. He just stood there. Because now the shift was complete. The man who had controlled the room was about to answer to it. The two internal affairs officers didn't rush. They didn't need to. Their pace was steady, deliberate, the kind that made people move without being told. Conversations in the lobby died down as they crossed the marble floor, their footsteps echoing just enough to be heard, but not enough to interrupt. They stopped in front of Reeves, not close enough to invade, not far enough to ignore. "Officer Daniel Reeves?" one of them asked. Reeves straightened instinctively. "Yeah," he said, his voice tight. "What's this about?" The officer studied him for a moment. Not hostile, not sympathetic. Just assessing. "We need you to step away from your post," he said. Reeves let out a short breath, a faint scoff slipping through. "For what?" The second officer spoke this time. "For review of an incident that occurred earlier today." Reeves shook his head slightly, his jaw tightening. "This is a misunderstanding," he said quickly. "She was being disruptive. I was just—" "We'll discuss that upstairs," the first officer said. Not louder, not sharper, just final. Reeves glanced around. The same people who had been silent earlier were still there, but now they weren't avoiding his gaze. They were meeting it, watching. Not with fear, with clarity. The younger officer behind the desk stepped back slightly, giving space without being told. The taller officer who had escorted Naomi earlier folded his arms, his expression neutral but no longer aligned with Reeves. That was the part that hit hardest. Not the agents, not the process, the absence of support. Reeves swallowed. I'm not leaving my post without... You already have, the second officer said. Reeves frowned. What? The officer held his gaze. The moment that incident occurred, this stopped being your post. Silence. Not empty. Heavy. Reeves looked at the badge on the officer's chest, then back at his face, and he searched for something, an opening, a challenge, anything he could push against. He found none. Slowly, his shoulders dropped. Not completely, but enough. All right, he said. The word came out quieter than anything he had said all day. The first officer nodded once. We'll need your badge. That landed differently. Reeves hesitated. Just for a second. Then reached up, unclipping it from his uniform. He looked at it briefly, longer than necessary, before placing it into the officer's hand. The click of metal leaving fabric echoed louder than it should have. Around them, no one spoke. No one needed to, because the shift was complete. The man who had once controlled the room was no longer part of it. Inside the courtroom, Naomi Brooks closed her folder. The hearing had concluded, not with noise, not with spectacle, but with clarity, the kind that didn't leave room for debate. The judge had spoken. The record had been established. And more importantly, the truth had been seen. Naomi rose from her seat, smoothing her hands lightly over the front of her coat as she stood. Around her, people adjusted, some standing out of respect, others simply following the motion without thinking. The silver-haired attorney approached her. Dr. Brooks, he said, more certain this time. That was thorough. Naomi gave a small nod. It needed to be. He hesitated, then added, What happened out there? It won't be overlooked. Naomi met his gaze. It already was, she said. That's why it matters now. He didn't argue, because he understood. Naomi turned and walked toward the exit. The same steady pace, the same quiet presence. The agents fell in beside her again, not leading, not following, just there. As they stepped back into the interior hallway, the atmosphere shifted once more. The formal tension of the courtroom gave way to something quieter, more reflective. At the end of the corridor, the secured doors opened again. The lobby came back into view, but it wasn't the same lobby she had left. The crowd had thinned, but those who remained stood differently now. Not scattered, not uncertain, aware. Reeves was gone. In his place, an empty space near the checkpoint. Naomi stepped into the room, her gaze moving across it once, not searching, not judging, just taking it in. The younger officer straightened when he saw her, his expression shifting from uncertainty to something closer to respect. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The maintenance worker stood near the wall, his arms folded, a quiet nod passing between them as she walked by. The woman who had been filming earlier lowered her phone completely this time, her eyes meeting Naomi's for a brief moment. There was something in that look. Not guilt. Not exactly. Recognition. Naomi walked to the center of the lobby and stopped. For just a second. She turned her head slightly, looking toward the checkpoint where everything had begun. The memory of it still lingered there. The sharp sound, the silence that followed, the weight of a room that chose not to act. But something else lingered now. Something stronger. She adjusted her watch one final time. The small movement caught the light. Then she spoke. Not loudly. Not for attention. Just enough. Next time, she said, her voice calm, steady, see people first. No anger, no accusation, just truth. The kind that stayed long after the words were gone, No one responded, because no one needed to. Naomi turned and walked toward the exit. The doors opened. Cold air drifted in. Outside, the city moved as it always did. Cars passing, people walking, life continuing without pause. She stepped into it without hesitation.
Behind her, the lobby remained still, not silent. In the same way as before, this time, the silence carried something else, because dignity having been taken, it had been revealed, and once seen, it couldn't be unseen. When Naomi Brooks stood in that same lobby and quietly said, "Next time, see people first." She didn't raise her voice, but she changed the entire room. This story reminds us that the real cost of judgment isn't just what we say, it was we choose not to see until it's too late. Next time you meet someone like Naomi Brooks, don't wait for Ruth, title, or someone else to step in. Just choose respect. In that first moment, sometimes one quiet decision to choose someone right is the difference between repeating a mistake and stopping it. Have you ever stayed silent in a moment like that lobby when you knew something wasn't right? Tell me honestly below. And in the next story, you are going to see what happens when someone speaks up before it's too late.